All right, so next up on the main stage, we're going to be talking about the future of spatial computing in China by Gavin. Newton-Tanzer is going to be leading that discussion today. Gavin is the co-founder and president of Sunrise International, producers of AWE Asia. Sunrise offers the best in experiential events, education, and media to tens of thousands of youth and professionals worldwide, as well as provides full cross-border localization and marketing support for hundreds of organizations seeking to better engage the Chinese market. So please give a warm AWE welcome to Gavin Newton-Tanzer, everybody.
Awesome. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. It's incredibly exciting to be back in person at AWE. But today we're going to be shifting gears a little bit and actually talking about the other side of the world, where we recently just finished hosting AWE Asia at the end of September. And today what I'd like to do is be able to share a little bit about some of the findings of the new developments, maybe some of the larger macro trends that we're seeing in the XR market in China, particularly considering during COVID it's a little bit challenging for our friends in Asia to visit us here, as well as for us to go back to Asia. Another thing to highlight is that, in general, we hosted our very first global 3D virtual event as well in Asia. And so we do encourage you, for those that are unable to attend in person, either next year or future events or on nights in Asia, that you do take the opportunity to join those. So China, and in the context of XR, is absolutely enormous. It's underrepresented, unfortunately, at the events here today. Usually we're joined by a large cohort of organizations coming from Asia. But it does represent about 56% of the global XR expenditure in 2021. And what's incredible about that is even for the next 5 years, we are anticipating a continual 67.5% compound annual growth rates. So you can see here a general idea. We're expecting maybe at the end of 2022 or so to be able to cross that $10 billion US mark in global AR or in Chinese annual AR VR spending. So it gives you an idea just a little bit of the context and size of that market. So just some general statistics to give you a little bit of a highlight of different elements of the market before we dive into some highlights from AWE Asia. For the consumer VR market, it tends to be at the moment still heavily emphasized gaming and personal entertainment, so watching videos. Though recently, as you can see here, in the growth from October 2018 through March 2021, we saw significant growth in people using VR headsets for study, for personal work, and for socializing. Again, still not at the level of personal entertainment, but growing considerably. Which shows people are increasingly more interested. One of the main reasons for this is because still, for most individuals in China, accessing VR comes in the form of location-based entertainment centers or VR arcades. So there still is a heavy emphasis on going to a center to use a VR device and not so much at home purchasing of a household VR device. Again, for those that are interested, however, when asking them what they're interested to do with a VR headset, there's incredible interest in VR shopping, VR cinema, concerts, museums, virtual experiences, most likely brought on due to the pandemic. Now, on the enterprise side, particularly with VR, you're seeing continued interest in education and gaming. Those are the two heavy components, with a large reason because, again, you have the location-based gaming centers and VR arcade networks, as well as heavy government support for education-related projects. However, this past year, we did see a large growth in people's interest in hosting events, and particularly bringing together groups of people. So you can see, again, most enterprise projects are now upwards of 1 to 20 users, though increasingly also 21 to 50 users. So they're becoming increasingly larger deployments of VR over time. Now, one of the things that's unique to China in allowing wearables, in particular smart glasses, VR headsets, to grow significantly is 5G. And something I'm sure many of you have seen AT&T or T-Mobile ads consistently. Well, China's actually made it happen with 916,000 5G stations actually already deployed by July of 2021. So it gives you a little bit of context of just how fast this is going, and looking to double that number by next year, which means that 365 million people, more than the population of the United States, basically, have access to 5G, albeit not everyone has a 5G compatible device, but they do have at least access to the network. And what that's going to mean for global compatibility of smart glasses or VR headsets is going to be tremendous in the years to come. Now, for AWE Asia specifically, initially we had a large number of product launches, as we generally do. Of course, every speaker was required to say metaverse no less than 99 times and do what you might expect. However, Shadow Creator launched their first, as traditionally a smart glasses provider, launched their Qiji VR headset. Mad Gaze launched their new Wave MR glasses, which is actually looking to be promoted internationally as a low-end or consumer-driven product, which is interesting. They're actually going to be launching a consumer-facing AR glass. Lighten decided to take a different approach and is actually doing a niche market swim goggles head-mounted display type device, which is interesting because you're seeing smart glasses being applied to a very specific niche market. HTC launched a series of reports, one of which was very interesting, was actually investigating in a scientific manner with an academic institution, the Beijing Sports University, on the impact of VR in fitness. And of course, as you might imagine, retention and interest in continuing athletics and fitness with a VR headset was up 4 times more than traditional workouts. And individuals represented that 2.4 times they experienced more joy or pleasure, which helped them persist in their workouts with VR. So it's interesting now to actually see them using this as an opportunity to collect some data about that actual fitness XR use case. The other thing that we're starting to see increasingly is VR headsets in China or various hardware ecosystems looking to cultivate their own global content ecosystems, which we'll address in a little bit. One of which was publicly announced at AWE Asia, was Movision, which is an affiliate of Shadow Creator, which launched their VR world ecosystem. Now, what this is stemming from is particularly due to COVID, because there's less interaction between China and the rest of the world in particular, there is increasingly a need for content to be licensed globally. So organizations like Movision, NetVios, Pico on the VR side, or Shadow Creator, Mad Gaze, Nreal, et cetera, are investing large sums of money to either invest in or acquire licenses of global content. So if you are a VR or AR content or software creator or developer, it's an incredible opportunity to actually get some prepayment or get some license acquired by organizations in China. So that's one of the areas where we're seeing a lot of opportunities for synergy between the markets in Asia and globally. SenseTime also highlighted their developments in AR navigation, most notably with government-sponsored airport projects, with the idea being that you can ultimately use a smartphone and have it navigate you to your gate or be able to show you where specific things are, like the bathroom. So interesting deployments of different companies here and to get an idea of sort of what's going on. However, there was also a lot of conversation, like there has been today, about whether the metaverse should be neutral or whether or not it's actually going to be a single company, sort of one-size-fits-all, similar to what we see in China in social media, like Tencent's monopoly functionally with WeChat, or one-size-fits-all app that is quite dominant. So in some ways, you're already seeing elements of that one-size-fits-all strategy. Now, IEEE's Yu Yuan, who is on the standard, manages the standard committee for mobile AR, ultimately was able to kind of navigate that. And of the people on his committee, 5 out of the 6 officers are actually Chinese companies or universities. And so it shows that clearly there's an incredible interest in setting the standards as we enter this new AR/VR universe in terms of having Chinese companies want to be at the forefront of helping setting those standards. Now, in terms of kit dominance, in terms of who's the major player now, that's unclear. There's still many, many people, many organizations that are looking to take the forefront. For example, you have Huawei, which is a massive global dominant player in China, Baidu, Oppo, Shadow Creator, Hisense, Lenovo, and actually many more that release updates to their SDK in order to try to get more organizations to ultimately adopt their technology and push themselves to the forefront and to be that ultimate major metaverse player. Unfortunately, for mostly unclear exactly who's going to win or how that's going to play out over time. So that's something to be watching very closely over time. Now, in terms of industrial policy, the way XR grows in China is very different than the way that it grows globally around the world. So, for example, the US government would never say, you know what, Detroit is going to be our new VR town, and all VR companies should go to Detroit. It happens a little bit more organically, where in China, it's actually quite heavy-handed industrial policy. So, for example, AR and VR still continues to be in the 5-year global plan for development in the government. Industrial Virtual Reality Alliance, which is a public-private association, again, sponsored by the government, is something that continues to be pushed and engaged in. For those of you that are familiar with the WCVRI conference, it's a big government conference where they fly in international experts to the city of Nanchang, which also happens to be one of these VR cities. It ultimately brought to that area over $30 billion worth of investments in over 321 projects. So this heavy sort of approach to bringing VR and AR to China is something that they're taking very, very seriously. Another example would be the Beidou Hubei and Guizhou, again, picking a regional city, an inland city that otherwise doesn't have any affiliation with AR/VR, and suddenly designating it, you know what, this is where all the heavy investment's going to be, providing tax subsidies and providing investment to relevant companies in those areas. And just to put this even more in highlight, in the Chinese New Year Gala, which is the most viewed show on television, which happens during Chinese New Year, there was heavy usage of AR/VR with a massive XR-enabled stage, similar to what you might see on The Mandalorian, with also AR implemented, AR aspects as well into that stage. But it's not all rosy, and this is where it becomes a little bit of a gray area, because on one side, the government is pushing really hard to promote XR technologies, but at the other side, the regulators are also a little bit nervous. And so recently, there have been very heavy-handed regulation, both in terms of gaming for minors under the age of 18, as well as in education policy for under the age of 18. So this has heavily restricted what potential opportunities there might be for VR gaming, particularly for that user base, and they're also some of the demographic that are most eager to take on these new technologies. So there's a potential play there. There's also very strict app approval standards, which include everything from, for example, violence or suggestive content, but also include things that might not be as obvious. Things like Peppa Pig, Winnie the Pooh, or just a skull may not appear in content that is ultimately going to be distributed in China. So these are things to be thinking about in terms of the content development there. Privacy and user data is also something that's taken very seriously. Specifically, the government wanted to make sure they have firm control over it. And there was recently a mobile crackdown on mobile devices, and actual applications were removed from the App Store because they didn't meet those compliances. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how these policy objectives play out. On one side, you have a government that heavily wants to be dominant in XR, wants 5G to become, pull them into the next generation, develop the economy, and build jobs. But on the other side, where they're genuinely concerned about the impact it might have on minors and other elements of the population. So it'll be interesting to play out. And there was one great example of this with the heralded acquisition of Pico by China's social media behemoth, ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok as well as a Chinese version of TikTok domestically and is growing rapidly. When they acquired Pico, some media heralded as this could be the Quest. Pico could become the Quest of China, which still does not have a company in that designation. However, the Security Times, which is a government-owned press, mentioned that blindly investing in the metaverse will ultimately come back to bite you. So you can see sort of a little bit of a play there between the two competing elements in Chinese government and Chinese society. Now, in addition to some of those announcements and some of the trends that we saw there, we also every year do a report where we actually poll the people in our database in Asia. This is ultimately polling enterprises and startups, investors in the region, and it tends to be at the C-level, founder level, director level, so slightly higher up. So that's something to keep in mind when you review some of this data. But some of it is very optimistic and maybe a little bit surprising. We are actually seeing incredible increase in confidence in terms of leaders in the XR space. So 8.72 out of 10 optimism score when we were asked how they would view the future of the XR industry in China. And that's actually up from 8.4, which was already quite optimistic in 2020. And this is in the midst of the pandemic. But then even more targeted, we asked them, how has the pandemic affected XR in your opinion? And the response was unilaterally positive, with more people than in 2020 actually saying that it had a very positive or positive effect, as there is a more recognition or interest in just XR and technology in general, with more people realizing when they're stuck at home in a small apartment how important it might be to connect with others. Now, the question still remains is how can international organizations connect with the market that is now a little bit difficult to access. And those barriers to communication, those barriers to working together are always a little bit of a difficult on each side. So we actually asked in this poll what they believed the biggest challenges were. The first, as we discussed, is the cost of localizing content. So many of the large enterprises in China, the very dominant XR enterprises, are hardware enterprises, whether it's smart glasses, whether it's volumetric capture, or various forms of cameras, or VR headsets. It's a lot of heavy heavy manufacturing. What's lacking is a lot of software. So there's a great deal of cost that needs to be put into localizing and adapting that content for the Chinese market. And so that's something that we thought was very interesting if you're thinking about sort of how you're going to engage that market. Second was compatibility issues. So in a world where OpenXR is not yet unilaterally accepted in China, where there aren't as many standards in terms of which SDK is ultimately going to be used for AR or for VR porting of content, this is always something that's going to be a little bit tricky. It's not like a developer can just use a certain standard and easily port to multiple devices, whether across mobile or whether across a particular hardware device. Communication difficulties and IP concerns were both mentioned as issues, but actually nowhere near as much of a difficulty as those top two. So that goes to show you that to a certain extent, some of these things will resolve themselves over time. We will have clearer standards, and there will be a little bit more practice in terms of localizing content inside of China. But it's something that's going to continue to be thinking about. Now, in terms of least concerns, currently the market is awash in venture capital and government funding. So investment is not an issue. In fact, one of the best opportunities for global developers to get paid is actually to tap into some of the funds that exist there for local versions of various forms of content. Likewise, tariffs and foreign regulation weren't considered concerns, though Chinese regulation was still a little bit of a concern depending on the enterprise asked. Now, in terms of primary focus, what a lot of the enterprises are working on, there seems to be a continued strong interest in developing partnerships and product development. So it's still very, very forward-looking in terms of growth policy and what they expect to do in the years to come. However, not so much interest in fundraising, again, because many of them have sufficient funding now in the market, and domestic market share, because many of these organizations are pivoting to look a little bit more at the international market as adoption, particularly of consumer VR, has grown tremendously outside of China, a lot faster than it actually has in the domestic market. So it's interesting to see sort of how these domestic Chinese companies might be looking for more partnerships as time goes on. Now, in terms of the most promising industries in XR, this remains relatively consistent over the past few years, so still huge interest in gaming and entertainment that still remains relatively dominant, followed by manufacturing and medical, again, more or less what you'd expect. The interesting, however, component is K-12 education and corporate training. When you divide them out, are both very dominant, but if you put them back together, it's still one of the largest segments here as well. So it's still gaming and entertainment, education, manufacturing, and medical. If you fit into any of these categories, again, it's a really interesting time to consider some international collaboration or partnership. Now, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't announce the dates for AWE Asia 2022. So we will be in Shenzhen again next year, August 26th to 27th. We really do hope that any organization that is interested in learning more about the learning about the XR market in Asia or connecting and developing partnerships there, you do take the opportunity to do so. And if you do ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be publishing all of the data that we have today, plus considerably more, in a AWE Asia market report, which will be coming out in the next few weeks. So please stay tuned for that, and happy to answer any questions you might have here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. That was great. All right, any questions? We got mics up at the front. If anyone has any burning questions about what's been going on over across the pond the other way. Any questions? Free noodles for anyone who does. No, anything like that? So what's, I think you talked about it a little bit, but some of like the top types of experiences people are having over in Asia with different devices?
Yeah, I'd say that currently there is very few original games being created in the Asian market right now. Most of it actually is coming from licensing international content. So there's actually massive Beat Saber competitions. So they're actually taking it in the way of sort of esports, where you'll have anything from, I'd say Beat Saber is still the most common, but in the Chinese version of EDC, where they'll have these incredible esports competitions and they'll play out in VR. So that's still very popular. And then increasingly, we're seeing not so much shooting games, but more sort of team building, more fun-filled games. Though part of that is also that sometimes shooting games or more violent games don't always get approved in the censors. And even when they do, particularly zombie games, they end up having the zombies kind of dissolve instead of kind of burst to pieces, as it might be appreciated in games here.
Yeah, very cool. And not so much in the workplace, right? It's all very games focused and entertainment based.
So in the consumer side, very heavily either in education, so actually being deployed in schools with very specific use cases funded by the government in advance. deployments. So the government will actually deploy maybe 10,000, 20,000, even sometimes 70,000 headsets to a specific region in order to test out a specific experience built for that region. So that's why you're seeing massive expenditure in the industry and deployment, but in very specific use cases. Outside of that, it tends to be VR arcades. Not so much at-home use. And then in terms of B2B use, again, specific cases, some organizations have done a really good job to evangelize this. HTC has been pushing really hard for the past few years. Dapeng, another organization, Skyworth, Hisense, as well as, I'm missing one, and of course Pico, been pushing heavily in the B2B side as well. Though I'd still say it's not widespread. I wouldn't
You
say
think that'll
corporate
change with
communication.
the acquisition of Pico by ByteDance? Was that last year?
Hopefully. I think they're most likely going to take so when Pico got acquired, I think the idea is still very much that Pico will become ByteDance's Quest. It'll become the Quest of China, which is really interesting because in China, we still don't have that level of consumer awareness or adoption yet. I think people will go to the centers, but they're not buying a device and bringing it home. That could be simply because it's probably a good reason is there's not that much content, so they don't have that much they can do with it yet. They don't have sort of open gaming stores. Here, if you, for example, are a developer and you want to put your content into Valve or PSVR or PlayStation, you have a pretty solid user base. Whereas in Asia, that's still not quite happening yet. So it's probably going to take a little while. I imagine a year or two. So right now, it's going to be mostly made for VR arcade type experiences until Pico or another Movision or one of these organizations can really break out, which we expect to see in the next couple of years.
Okay. Oh, really exciting. Well, thank you, Gavin. Appreciate it. Any last second? Any questions, anyone? No. Bueller.
Thanks so much.
Bueller. No. All right.
See you
Thanks,
in Asia.
Gavin. We'll be back in a few minutes for the next talk.